Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis. We'll begin at Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the bottom. Continue on with the Machlokes Rabbah and Rav Chisda as whether we hold of Hoyel or not. Now the Gemara is going to ask on Rabbah. Rav Chisda asks on Rabbah. You, Rabbah, hold of Hoyel. You hold that it's mutter to do the malacha, it's mutter to cook on or bake on Yontiv for the next day, for Yom Chol, even if he's not going to use it for his own consumption, but Hoyel, maybe, perhaps, Archim will come, guests will come, so b'deraisa, even if he's not going to use it for his own purposes, there's no Isser Deraisa. He asked the following question. Do we in fact say Hoyel? We learned in the Mishnah, a person who plows one furrow, one single furrow, he plows only one furrow, and there are scenarios where he can be chayiv on it for 8 lavin. What's the case? He plows with an ox and a donkey together under one yoke. So that's kilaim. He's being chayrish with the shor of chamor yachtav. So he's over that iser. V'hei mukdoshim, and they're mukdoshim. So if both of them are mukdoshim, so for instance, if the shor is for a kodesh for the mizbeach, he's over on the iser of using for his personal use something which is kodesh l'mizbeach. Because the Pasuk says, you're not allowed to work with Bechor, which is something which is Mizbeach, and we learn out that anything which is Korav on the Mizbeach is also to use it, to work with it for your personal use. And if the Chamor is Kodshe Berek HaBayis, then, and if he does it b'mezid, he's over on the Yisur of Me'ilah. So you have 3 Yisurim already. V'kilaim b'kerem, and if what he does in the plowing is covering kilaim in a vineyard, so there's seeds in a vineyard, so he's chayiv for a kilaim, kerem. With shviyas, if it happens to be on shviyas, he's chayiv for doing the void on the karka, on shmita, on shviyas. B'yontiv, and if it's on yontiv, he's chayiv for doing the malacha on yontiv. This is not considered to be oichel nefesh. He's not going to use it for immediate consumption, for consumption on that day. According to some Rishonim, in any event, that charish is not mutter on Yontiv, so he's over on Yontiv. Kohen v'nozir beis hatumah, and if he's a kohen, when also a nozir, so he has the isser of a kohen in a beis hakvoros and a nozir beis hakvoros, so you have a total of 8 lavin. Now, if you say that we apply the principle of Hoyel, Charisha loy lechayev, he should not be chayev for Charisha. Why is that? Hoyel v'chaze lekisui dam tzipor, because perhaps there will be a use for it on Yontiv. Perhaps he'll shecht a bird, and you have to do the mitzvah kisui adam, and therefore perhaps there is a benefit, a use for it, the mitzvah kisui adam. So why should we say that he's over on Yontiv? Hoyel, that it will be used for the mitzvah kisui adam. The Rishonim asked the kasha that, well, how can you say that Hoyel, that it might be used for kisui adam, therefore we should say that it's mutter and it's doicha Yontiv? Why should we apply Hoyel in that manner? The mitzvah kisui adam is a mitzvah essay. Yontiv, mitzvah essay is not doicha Yontiv. It's not doicha either through gzeres hakosov, or because, according to those who hold that Yontiv is an essay and a loisase, and ein essay doicha essay v'loisase. An essay is doicha loisase, but if Yontiv is both, it's not doicha. So how, therefore, could we say that the mitzvah of kisui adam, if he shechs a bird in the mitzvah to cover the blood with earth, that should be doicha the malach on Yontiv? The Rishonim give different terutzim. Taisus over here gives two terutzim. Rabbeinu Dovid gives a terutzim. Taisus and Chulin says as follows: that Yontiv, the reason why essay is not doicha, and the Yontiv is according to the reasoning that Yontiv is an essay of loisase. Now, Taisus and Chulin says, even though we say that an essay is not doicha, an essay in a loisase, so therefore it would not be mutter to do this for the purpose of kisui adam. But you wouldn't get malchus either. because we would say as follows, that the essay is not doicha aloisase v'essay. So what does that mean? Essay is doicha loisase. The loisase would, the kisui mitzvah, kisui dam would be doicha the loisase malach of yontiv. But it would not be mutter to do it because he would still be left with an essay. But on an essay, you don't get malchus. So therefore, the way he learns it is not that we're saying that it's mutter, but why would you say that you get malchus for it? Why don't we say hoyel? That perhaps he will need it for the purpose of mitzvah kisui adam, and therefore, if it's needed for the mitzvah of kisui adam, then we say that we should consider it like he's doing it for that purpose, and therefore should be no malchus for it, because the essay of kisui adam would be doiche the loisasa malacha, and you're only left with an essay. You don't get malchus on an essay. I'll call upon him. Why don't we say ohoyel over here? We're talking about here where a field that he's plowing has stones, pointed stones, and it's not roy for kisuyata. Gemara says it's still roy because roy l'kachon, you can crush it into fine pieces and you can use it to cover the blood. It's roy for kisui. In fact, the Gemara Katisha b'yontav mishari. Katisha is also on yontav. That's not a teres because that's a told of teichan, grinding, and it's a malacha, so we can't. It's not mutter on yontav. Moran says ruyas l'kachin kalach hariyat in a chanami, but you could do it kalach hariyat in an unusual manner, and in an unusual manner there's no isur deraisa. Now, even though it's also midrabanan, but we're talking over here about malchus. We're talking about an isur deraisa, so it's roy to do it, to grind, to crush it up kalach hariyat. Moran says b'tsumna. We're talking about ground that is very rocky, and you can't crush it up. So therefore, it's not roy for kisui adam. Well, if you're talking about rocky terrain, if it's rocky, then you can't plow or you can't plant over there. Moran says tsumna milmala v'afritichuach milmata. We're talking about where there's tsumma, there's a rock on top, and there's offer tichuach mil mata, below it is soft soil. So therefore, he is plowing it to turn over the seeds that are in the soft soil. In fact, more of a typical mishum offer tichuach. Well, why don't you say therefore he should not be a chayav for plowing on yontiv, because you have the soft soil, and that soft soil can be used for kisui adam. Therefore, in a chanami, but if there is soft soil on the bottom, that soft soil can be used for kisui adam, and you should say hoyel, and therefore he should be chayav. Elamar Baravashi says, we're talking about tina. In a chanami, we're not talking about a case of tsunma, we're talking about mud. And mud is not roy for kisui adam. Like Ram Chalva says, because for kisui adam you need to have earth which is not one clump, which is not one mass, which you can scatter over on the blood, which doesn't stick together. So mud is not roy for kisui adam, and that's why you're chayav. But mud, you can't plow and plant in mud. Things don't grow in mud. More answers b'mesunta. We're talking about wet mud, which you can plant things in. So you're chayav for yontav, you're chayav for the malacha, and there's no hoyel for kisui adam because it's not roy for kisui adam. So we've been doing the kasha from hoyel because we're talking about earth that's not roy for kisui adam. Now, as a side note, we mentioned over here by Shvias that one of the malchus is for doing this avoda with the karaka on Shvias. Now, even though the Torah says by Shvias leisizra, it doesn't say don't plow, and we're talking here about plowing. So why are you chayav for plowing? Why are you chayav for plowing on Shemitah? So Rashi explains this because we're talking over here is where he's turning over the earth on seeds. Therefore, what you're chayav over here, this is also considered to be planting, is covering the seeds. So therefore the plowing is covering the seeds and you're chayiv for Shemitah as well. Well, if that's the case on Yontiv, why don't you have two isurim, two malachas? You're plowing and you're planting. You're doing both. So why isn't there an additional malacha for the Yontiv? Rabbeinu Dovid answers because you're only chayiv for at one time, you're only chayiv for one, even though he does different malachas, multiple malachas, but in one session he's only chayav one set of malachas. Eisei Abaya, another kasha to Rabbi who holds of Hoyo, Hamavashal Giranosha B'chol B'Yontev, if one cooks Giranosha with milk on Yontev, V'oichlani eats like a chomesh. He has 5 sets of malachas. What are they? Like a Mishum Mavashal Gid B'Yontev. He's over for cooking the Giranosha on Yontif because there's no heter to do the malacha bishul on something that's also for him to eat. And he's also like Mishum Vashal Basar B'chalav. There's a love of cooking meat and milk together. V'loike Mishum Oichel Basar B'chalav. And he's also a time where he's eating it, so there's an isser of eating Basar B'chalav, meat and milk together. V'loike Mishum Havar. And he's also like it for lighting the fire on Yontiv. Now, v'yamrin and hoyel, if we hold of hoyel, havar loyl chayev, hoyel de chazil tzarcha, you should not be chayev for havar because you might need it for your own cooking, for cooking that's mutter on Yontiv. Amar lei, Rabbi answered to Abaye, he said, Apik havar, I'll get a nosha shel nevela. He said, En chanami, but you from this list remove havar because he would not be high for havar for lighting the fire, and insert rather that it's a get a nosha that we're talking about is a get a nosha of nevela. And he's over on eating the get a nosha of a nevela. So there's an additional isser of eating the get a nosha of a nevela. So get a nosha is possible and it's a nevela. He says in this list there are 2 isserim that are involved in eating. V'shleisha al bishula and 3 for cooking. Navim Isa, if it's according to you that you remove havar and you insert nevela, shalosh ala chilosa miboya, there's 3 for eating. There's eating of nevela, basar b'chalav, and there's eating of the giranosha. Ela apik havar of ayil atze muksa in a chanami. You have to remove havar, don't insert nevela, but put atze muksa. He's using wood that is muksa, that he used wood that is muksa, and on that, he's chayav for that. Abaye asks, Muksa deraisa? Is Muksa deraisa? You're telling me that one of the lavim that we're talking about is for using the wood that hasn't been prepared from beforehand. It's not designated from beforehand. It's Muksa. And is that a deraisa? He said yes. On the 6th day, on Erev Shabbos, they prepare what they're going to bring. Therefore, what is used for Shabbos has to be something that was prepared. Something which is not prepared is muksa, and that can't be used on Shabbos. And it says, don't do malacha. Meaning it says, you're prepared. So, preparing means normally cooking and baking, the things that you prepare for Shabbos. And it says, so only things which are designated, which are prepared, are allowed to be used for Shabbos. And it's mentioned in the context of other things, which are cooking and baking, which is a malacha. So this is also considered to be a malacha. So he says that therefore muksa is a deraisa. Now that's going to be the subject of the next year, of the next Amud. But just as a side point, first of all, Taisus mentions over here that what we're talking about over here are different malkas for Chil Yontiv. We're talking about he's like a mishum that mevashel on Yontiv, And we're saying that he's also like, initially the Gemara said Havara, and now it says Muksa. So Tais points out that this is not going like the Gemara Makas, and not like we said just previously, that Ein Chiluk Malachas on Yom Tov. Because here we're talking about that in one session he would be chayiv 2 Malkas for Chil Yom Tov, for 2 Malachas on Yom Tov. The Afikei Yam says, well, we're talking about here about Muksa, that he used firewood of Muksa to cook, and this a Gid, Anosha, and Basar B'Cholav, which there's no hatchet to do that because it's also in Yom Tov. But why don't we say Hoyel? Why don't we say Hoyel, that then this firewood could be used, theoretically, for a bishul or something that's mutter? So if we do adopt Hoyel, why don't we say Hoyel, and therefore it should be mutter? So he answers that you can't say Hoyel because each cooking is considered a separate ma'isa. Meaning, if we say Hoyel, if you're cooking this food, even if you're not using it for yourself, but Hoyel, that Ikloi Orchim, guests might come, you could use this cooking for them. So, therefore, it's considered, if you hold Hoyel, Tzarech Yom Tov. But to do a separate act of cooking, we can't say Hoyel that this act is now, we should say it's mutter because it can be used for a different act of cooking. And therefore, if it's a separate, using this wood for a separate bishul, that's considered a separate ma'isa. Hoyel won't help you with that.